This was such a good idea. The air smells amazing.
It really is perfect, isn't it? Easy now, Clara.
Look at me.
Everything is going to be fine, I promise you that.
The train let out a long, weary hiss as it slowed to a stop, steam rising into the pale morning sky like a final sigh of surrender. Clara stood frozen at the edge of the carriage for a moment, her gloved fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of a small, scuffed suitcase. Everything she owned, every hope she had left, was packed inside it. The platform below looked rough and unfamiliar, made of weathered planks darkened by years of dust and boots. This wasn't the place she had imagined during the long nights spent rereading his letters by candlelight. This place felt too open, too quiet, too permanent. She stepped down carefully, the hem of her coat brushing against her ankles. The cold air bit at her cheeks, sharper than she expected, and she drew a slow breath to steady herself. All around her, strangers moved with purpose, men unloading crates, women greeting family, the sound of laughter and hurried footsteps echoing across the station. Clara felt invisible and exposed at the same time, like she didn't quite belong anywhere yet. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the man she had agreed to marry without ever truly knowing. Then she saw him. He stood a little apart from the others, tall and solid, his shoulders broad beneath a worn coat. A cowboy hat shaded his eyes, but his posture was unmistakable, steady, grounded, like the land itself. Beside him stood a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, clutching the man's hand with quiet confidence. The child's hair was tousled by the wind, his gaze curious as it swept across the platform. Something in Clara's chest tightened. She hadn't known about the boy until the last letter, mentioned almost as an afterthought. And now, seeing them together, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The cowboy met her eyes, and for a moment, neither of them moved. There was no smile, no dramatic greeting, just a long, measuring look that made Clara feel as though he could see straight through her careful composure. He nodded once, subtle but certain, and guided the boy toward her. "Clara," he said simply, his voice low and calm. "Yes," she replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. The boy peeked out from behind his father's coat, studying her with open curiosity. Clara offered a tentative smile, unsure of what else to do. He didn't look away. Instead, his lips curved upward, just a little, as if he'd decided she was all right. The ride to the ranch passed mostly in silence. Clara sat stiffly in the wagon, hands folded in her lap, watching the wide stretch of land roll by. The sky seemed endless here, the fields vast and untamed. Every mile carried her farther from the life she had known, and from any easy way back. The cowboy drove with practiced ease, occasionally glancing at her as if checking whether she was still there. The boy hummed softly, swinging his legs, completely at home. By the time the ranch house came into view, Clara's nerves were stretched thin. The building stood strong against the open land, simple but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. It should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt final. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding as the wagon came to a stop. Before she could stop herself, the fear she had been holding inside spilled out. "You can send me back," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. If this isn't what you wanted, I won't make trouble, Her words trailed off as she looked at him, uncertainty filling her eyes. She didn't say it aloud, but the truth was there all the same. She was afraid she wouldn't be enough. Afraid she'd never belong. Afraid that this new life, promised so carefully in ink and paper, might reject her the moment she stepped fully into it. The wagon came to a slow stop, the wooden wheels settling into the dirt as if the land itself had accepted their arrival. For a moment, no one spoke. Clara's words lingered in the air, fragile and exposed, and she immediately wished she could pull them back. She kept her gaze lowered, staring at the edge of her coat, bracing herself for an answer she feared she already knew. The cowboy didn't respond right away. He set the reins aside with deliberate care, his movements unhurried, as though he understood that rushing this moment would only make it worse. Clara felt his eyes on her, steady and searching, but she couldn't bring herself to look back. Silence stretched, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft creak of leather. Then she felt it, a small tug on her sleeve. She looked down to see the boy had climbed off the wagon and come to stand beside her. His fingers clutched the fabric of her coat, hesitant but determined. He didn't seem afraid of her at all. Instead, his eyes held something Clara hadn't expected, hope. The cowboy noticed too. His expression shifted as he watched his son, the hard lines of his face easing, just slightly. "Eli," he said quietly, not in warning, but in acknowledgement. The boy swallowed, as if summoning courage. He looked up at his father, then back at Clara. "Pa," he said softly, "is she gonna go away?" Clara's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. The thought of leaving, of disappointing this child she had only just met, hurt more than she had imagined. The cowboy exhaled slowly and knelt so he was eye level with his son. "That depends," he said gently. "On what she wants, and on what we want." Eli turned fully toward Clara now, studying her face with earnest seriousness. "I like you," he said simply. "You smiled at me at the station. Mama used to smile like that." The words struck Clara like a sudden wind. She felt tears prick her eyes and quickly blinked them back, her heart aching at the tenderness of his honesty. She hadn't known what she could offer this family, but in that moment, she realized how deeply this boy needed something she still carried inside her: kindness, patience, love. The cowboy stood, his gaze never leaving her. When he spoke, his voice was firm, but there was warmth beneath it now. You asked if I'd send you back, he said. Truth is, I could have answered for myself. He paused, then glanced at Eli, who had slipped his hand into Clara's. But I ain't the only one who gets a say. Clara finally looked up, meeting his eyes. They were no longer distant or unreadable. They were thoughtful, protective, and quietly certain. My son already chose you, he continued. And I trust his judgment more than you might think. Clara's breath caught. The fear she had carried with her across miles and months began to loosen its grip. She looked down at Eli, whose hand held hers with surprising confidence, as if he had already decided she belonged here. I don't expect perfection, the cowboy added, his voice softening. This life isn't easy, but if you're willing to try, we'll try too. Clara nodded slowly, tears finally slipping free. For the first time since she had stepped onto that train, she didn't feel like a stranger being tested. She felt like someone being invited, carefully, sincerely, into a life that was already making room for her. Clara stood there for a long moment, Eli's small hand still wrapped around hers, as if letting go might break the fragile promise that had just been made. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, carrying with it the smell of earth and sun-warmed wood. The ranch house loomed ahead, no longer just a structure of timber and stone, but a threshold, one she had been afraid to cross until now. The cowboy gestured toward the house with a slight nod of his head. Come on, he said. You should see where you'll be staying. His tone wasn't commanding or uncertain. It was calm, assured, like someone who had already made peace with the choice in front of them. They walked together toward the porch, Eli tugging her along eagerly, as if afraid she might change her mind. Each step felt lighter than the last. Clara noticed small details she hadn't seen before. The way the porch boards were worn smooth by years of footsteps, the sound of wind chimes hanging near the door, the faint laughter of Eli as he skipped ahead. These ordinary things grounded her, made the place feel lived in rather than intimidating. Inside, the house was warm and simple. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a clean kitchen, a sturdy table, and a vase with a few wildflowers resting in the center. Clara paused, absorbing it all. This wasn't the grand home she had once imagined when she first answered the advertisement, but it felt honest. Real. This was my wife's, the cowboy said quietly, gesturing toward the flowers. His voice carried a softness touched with memory. Eli picked them this morning. They're beautiful, Clara replied, meaning more than just the flowers. She knelt beside Eli, meeting his eyes. You have very good taste. He beamed. That means you'll stay, right? Clara hesitated only for a heartbeat. Yes, she said gently. I'll stay. Eli threw his arms around her without warning, hugging her tightly. Clara laughed softly, wrapping her arms around him, feeling something in her chest settle into place. It wasn't certainty, not yet, but it was belonging, and that felt just as powerful. The cowboy watched them from across the room, his expression unreadable at first. Then he smiled, just a little. We'll take things one day at a time, he said. No rush, no pressure. That's all I ask, Clara replied, standing again. She met his gaze, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, for trusting me. He nodded once. Thank you for choosing us. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, Clara stood on the porch with Eli beside her. The land stretched endlessly before them, peaceful and promising. The cowboy leaned against the railing, watching them with quiet contentment. Clara realized then that this life wouldn't be perfect. There would be hard days, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. But there would also be shared meals, laughter, and small hands reaching for hers when the world felt uncertain. And as Eli slipped his hand into hers again, Clara knew she wasn't being sent back. She was being invited forward, into a family that had already made room for her, and a future she was finally brave enough to accept.